The ocean is so vast, covering nearly 3/4 of the planet, it seems impossible that we humans could change it. And yet, something unprecedented is happening because of human activities. The oceans are getting warmer. Changes in temperatures have always been part of a natural cycle in our planet's past.
But this time, the change may be our doing and our undoing. If we don't act now to reduce global warming, we may be putting our planet and all the life on it in truly hot water.
In this program, we'll take a look at 3 very different places: the cold northern region of the Arctic, the temperate wetlands of Chesapeake Bay, and the tropical islands of the South Pacific. We'll see the dramatic impact that global warming is having right now on our ocean ecosystems. But first, a brief journey into the atmosphere. Of the 9 planets in our solar system, only Earth can support life. Venus is too hot. Mars is too cold. Why is Earth just right? The most important reason is our atmosphere. Think of the Earth's atmosphere as one big blanket covering the planet, keeping the temperature ideal for all sorts of life forms, including us. The blanket is composed of carbon dioxide, water vapor, methane, and other gases which tend to trap heat from the sun. As the amount of these gases in the atmosphere increases, so does the Earth's temperature. Every time we breathe, we take in oxygen and release carbon dioxide, or CO2. In an intricate dance, plants and trees absorb the carbon dioxide that we animals release. We usually think of most plants as being on land, but plants in the ocean, especially the microscopic plants called phytoplankton, actually absorb much of our carbon dioxide.
But for some time now, we've been producing far more CO2 than the plants can absorb. Now, don't start holding your breath. Our breathing is not the culprit.
It's all the energy we consume from burning what are called fossil fuels: coal, oil, and natural gas. Since the birth of the engine, we've dramatically increased how much fuel we burn and how much carbon dioxide we emit into the atmosphere. Think about how much energy you use. In 1 year, a typical 10-year-old in America will use almost 5 times more energy than her great-great-grandmother would have. That's because we rely on fossil fuels to run our computers, appliances, light bulbs, cars, airplanes, practically everything we think of as modern conveniences. At the same time, we've been clearing and burning our forests. Deforestation not only increases carbon dioxide emissions, but it also reduces the number of plants that could absorb the carbon we release. If we keep pumping out carbon dioxide, it's like we're adding additional blankets to the atmosphere. But unlike the blanket on your bed, the layers in the atmospheric blanket can't be taken off so easily. As you watch this program, keep a scorecard handy. We have several tips for you about how you, your friends, and your community can help minimize global warming. You think of the Arctic as the very definition of cold. But this region is one of the first to show dramatic changes due to global warming. For thousands of years, the Arctic Ocean has been covered by thick sea ice. But look at this view taken from a submarine. The ice pack is all broken up.
The ice throughout the entire Arctic basin has thinned. It isn't thicker some places, thinner others. Everywhere it's thinner by about 40 or 45%.
Changes in sea ice could have dire consequences for the animals that live in the north, including polar bears. Polar bears have the scientific name of Ursus maritimus, or bears of the sea. They can swim for miles, but they spend most of their time roaming the ice looking for food.
It hunts largely in pursuit of the ringed seal. The ringed seal is hunted by stalking a breathing hole. When the ringed seal returns to take a breath, the polar bear will capture the seal. It's a remarkably well-tuned system. Without the ringed seal needing the breathing hole, the polar bear doesn't have a chance at catching a ringed seal. And the ringed seal doesn't need a breathing hole if the ice is broken up. And this is what we've seen now in the last few years in the Arctic in the summer. During the height of summer, rather than having a solid ice pack in the central Arctic, it's been characterized more by vast expanses of open water. And one of the questions you have to ask, particularly for the Arctic, where this change is occurring so rapidly, is whether there are species that are really at risk. And the one that comes to mind right away is the polar bear.
For the sake of the polar bears, consider a day without driving. Every gallon of gas you use releases 20 pounds of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. If you and your family leave the car at home or take public transit one day a week, give yourself 2 credits. Other species are equally affected by these changes in the ice. In winter, Arctic foxes rely on the polar bear's leftovers. These sly, small creatures tag along behind the massive bears, carefully avoiding a swipe from lethal claws. Walruses also depend on the ice and are often found gathering in big groups for protection. Pups are born on top of the ice, and entire herds can be found resting and molting on the surface. Walruses use the ice as a diving platform. They can plunge as deep as 300 feet to scour clams and even crabs off the sea floor. A shrinking ice pack could be devastating for all these Arctic animals. For the sake of the walruses, replace your standard light bulbs with compact fluorescent light bulbs. One compact fluorescent bulb will last for 7 years and save half a ton of CO2 from entering the atmosphere. If you replace your lights with compact fluorescent bulbs, give yourself 1 credit. From the Arctic to the Andes, warmer temperatures are causing massive melting of glaciers. As this water runs off the land, it fills the oceans, making sea levels rise. Sea level also rises when warmer temperatures make seawater expand. Over the last 100 years, sea level has risen on the order of 8 inches. Rising sea levels and thinning ice threaten the survival of some of the human communities that have lived in the Arctic for centuries. Like the polar bear, people here rely on the ice for their hunting grounds. The ice also protects these coastal communities from violent storms.
Back in my younger days, we used to cross this inlet about this time of year. But now we've got nothing but water back there. I think the climate gets real warm.
For the sake of Arctic communities, recycle your newsprint, your cardboard, metal, and plastics. Recycling reduces the amount of fossil fuels used to make new products like plastic bags and bottles. If you recycle in your home or at work, give yourself 2 credits.
Here along the Chesapeake Bay, you can see the powerful impact of sea level rise. Just behind me, where you see open water, used to be filled with marsh grass. When the water rises by just a few inches, it drowns the marsh. And when we lose the marsh, we lose the base of the food web.
Chesapeake Bay is America's largest estuary. Estuaries are where the rivers meet the sea, areas where the tides flood in twice a day. Estuaries provide both food and nursery grounds to hundreds of species. Native Americans called this place Chiswapeake, the Great Shellfish Bay, because of the abundance of oysters and blue crabs. Chesapeake Bay also provides an important spawning ground for fish like the striped bass. Most Atlantic striped bass are born in these shallow, warm waters. And in recent years, efforts to restore this fish population have made great strides. But the striper's comeback could be jeopardized as rising sea levels claim even more of the marsh, disrupting the food web the fish depend on. For the sake of the stripers, buy a fuel-efficient car. Hybrid vehicles are becoming more affordable. If you own or plan to buy a car that is fuel-efficient, give yourself 4 credits. Wetlands, like those that line the Chesapeake Bay estuary, play a critical role in the health of our planet. They clean our waterways by filtering out pollutants. They provide habitat for wildlife. They protect our communities from floods. But for centuries, we have drained wetlands to make farms, shopping malls, and backyards. We've taken the wet out and left them as land. But now, wetlands face another threat. Because most wetlands are in low-lying coastal areas, large sections could become permanently submerged by a rising sea. This phenomenon is already happening in the Chesapeake.
This whole area that we're looking at right now was at one time solid marsh. You can see the outline of an old meandering river channel that actually cut through the marsh.
A marsh grows in layers. In winter, the grass dies back, creating a new foundation for next year's growth. Normally, a marsh can absorb a small rise in sea level. But what's happening in the Chesapeake is that the water is rising too quickly for the marsh to adapt.
Where it's permanently submerged, it can't survive and it dies, and the area begins to pond. And what we see here is the marsh actually breaking up. It's actually falling apart almost like tissue paper.
Loss of marsh due to sea level rise could affect hundreds of species of migrating water birds. These birds rely on the marsh for their nesting and feeding grounds. Like many migratory species, these birds travel thousands of miles across borders and often return to the same exact marsh year after year. For the sake of the water birds, take a survey of your household appliances and office equipment. See how many of them have the Energy Star label, a U.S. government symbol for energy efficiency. If you own or buy an Energy Star appliance, score yourself 2 credits. Global warming means we're not only going to lose more habitat, we're also going to face more instances of extreme weather, both hot and cold. The combination of severe storms and a rising sea leads to extensive flooding, damaging millions of homes, businesses, farms, highways, and other infrastructures.
When we think of climate change and we think of greenhouse gas emissions, we also need to realize that not only has there been an industrial revolution, but there has been a revolution like this, in which people and the populations have moved to the coastal areas.
While severe weather will strain inland regions, coastal areas are particularly at risk. One out of every 5 people lives within 18 miles of the coast. Perhaps the skyrocketing value of oceanfront real estate could be an economic incentive to address global warming.
Climate change is real. We're not going to be able to build dikes or barriers to deal with the increase in sea level rise. And it's not going to be something that is going to be a quick fix.
For the sake of the millions of people who live near our planet's coastlines, ask the businesses you deal with to provide you with a copy of their corporate policy on climate change. If you encourage local and national businesses to use more efficient technologies, give yourself 2 credits. It's not just sea level rise that is affecting ocean ecosystems. In the South Pacific, coral reefs are facing the dire consequences of warmer waters. Coral reefs are extraordinary centers of biodiversity, providing habitat for thousands of species. Though they look like rocks or plants, corals are animals. Most live in colonies, and to survive, have a symbiotic relationship with a microscopic algae called zooxanthellae. It's these organisms that give the coral most of its nutrients and color.
When you see a coral reef, you see mostly corals, but you have to think about the thousands of other organisms that are dependent on the structure that corals produce for their home, specifically fishes and other invertebrates like shrimp and mollusks and bivalves. There's a lot of animals that live inside the structure, and once that structure is lost, once the coral dies, they lose their home as well. There's a cascade effect. You lose your corals, and then you start to lose other species from the reef.
Like many animals in the sea, corals are extremely sensitive to shifts in temperature.
You can raise the temperature of seawater 1 or 2 degrees and a coral will bleach. The coral loses its color and it becomes translucent. And in most cases, the early cases of bleaching, most of those corals actually survive. But if you raise the temperature of that water 2, 3, or 4 degrees, and it happens for a very long period of time, many of those corals are likely not to survive.
During the unusually warm summer of 1998, a dramatic occurrence of bleaching devastated 16% of the world's coral reefs.
A good way of thinking about this is to think about tropical rainforests. It's well known that tropical rainforests and coral reefs have about the equivalent level of biodiversity, a number of species. We're very much aware of the loss in biodiversity and potential from tropical rainforests. Imagine now that the same exact thing is happening to coral reefs, that on a yearly basis there are large areas of coral reef that are actually disappearing and either are unlikely to return or will take hundreds if not thousands of years to return.
For the sake of corals, plant a tree in your yard or neighborhood. Remember, plants absorb carbon dioxide. If you replace some of your lawn with a garden, it also reduces the need for power mowers. If you plant a tree or a garden, give yourself 1 credit. The combined effects of coral bleaching and rising sea levels could devastate thousands of islands in the tropics. Many nations of the South Pacific are made up of coral atolls, small islands that on average are only a few feet above sea level. The coral reefs that surround these islands provide the basis for recreation, tourism, and fishing. At the same time, reefs protect local communities.
This is one of the major sources of coastal protection for most of these low-lying atolls, because they act as barriers to stop the storm surges coming on the islands. So if the warm water is killing off these reefs, you will never have that protection.
Sea level rise is also having an impact on these islands as salt water leaches into freshwater wells and destroys croplands.
This problem is a global problem, and nobody, no country is going to escape its impacts. That's a fact. And we may be the first victims of this phenomenon, but your turn will come up later, whether it will be your children or grandchildren, unless you do something about it. We are like the warning system for the whole world to see.
For the sake of the Pacific Islanders, find out if renewable energy is available in your community. Switching to green power like solar or wind reduces carbon dioxide emissions. If you're working toward using green power in your home, school, or workplace, give yourself 4 credits. We can turn the tide on global warming. The answer isn't to return to the Stone Age. It's to find smarter, more efficient ways to provide energy for our homes, schools, businesses, and communities. Individual actions can make a huge difference. We can continue to develop technologies that tap abundant, renewable energy sources like solar and wind. Even soybeans can be used to make clean biodiesel fuel for buses and cars. We can be more conscious of everything we do that uses energy and try to use less. The actions we take together to slow global warming will provide us with the time to better prepare for and adapt to climate change. Take a look at your scorecard. How many credits do you have?
5, that's a start. 10, you're getting there. 15, fantastic. Remember, there's plenty we can do to get ourselves out of hot water.